The mahogany conference table between us felt like a battlefield, and I was the only one unarmed. Across from me, Richard Calloway, CEO of Summit Dynamics, sat with his hands folded, a picture of cold efficiency. To his right, Lisa Markson, the HR director, held a thick envelope, her fingers drumming against it as if eager to finish this unpleasant task. I had spent 18 years in this company, 18 years of late nights in the lab, debugging algorithms until my vision blurred, 18 years of sacrificed weekends, missed vacations, abandoned relationships, all in pursuit of something bigger. I built their predictive analytics system, the very foundation that had doubled their revenue, secured billion-dollar partnerships, and positioned Summit Dynamics as the leader in AI-driven finance. And now, they were discarding me like outdated software. Richard exhaled, unbothered, as he delivered the sentence. "You're being let go, Evelyn." The words landed like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I had seen this coming. I had known for weeks. It started when a misdirected email landed in my inbox, an internal board discussion about how they planned to push me out before the company's next major acquisition. They weren't just firing me. They were planning to erase me. Lisa slid the envelope across the table. "This contains your severance package," she said, her voice mechanical. 2 weeks' pay for every year of service. 3 months of continued health care. A non-disclosure agreement. Ah, there it was. The gag order. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me silenced. I glanced at the envelope, but didn't touch it. "Let me guess," I said, keeping my voice level. "The board wants to go in a new direction." Richard didn't even bother lying. "We've decided to merge the technology and strategy divisions." He paused, then added with calculated indifference, "Jack Vaughn will be assuming oversight of your team." I almost laughed. Jack Vaughn, a mid-level executive with zero technical knowledge, a man whose only talent was agreeing with Richard in board meetings and making sure his suits fit perfectly. He had never written a single line of code. He had never understood the complexity of the AI system I built. And now he was in charge of it. Lisa, eager to hammer in the final nail, spoke again. "Your transition period ends Friday at 5 p.m. You'll need to return all company devices, and your access will be revoked. Standard protocol. Standard protocol. How convenient. How clean. How expected." I let the silence stretch, watching them. Richard was calm, detached, already moving on. Lisa was stiff, expecting me to lash out, maybe even beg. But I didn't, because they thought they were winning. They thought I was powerless. They had no idea. For the past 6 months, I had been quietly preparing for this moment. Heavy check mark, I had refined my AI model on my personal servers outside of Summit's jurisdiction. Heavy check mark, I had documented every memo, every meeting, every stolen idea. Heavy check mark, and most importantly, I had already secured my next move. I took a deep breath and reached for the envelope, but not to sign it. I just wanted to watch Richard smirk, to let him think, for a few seconds, that he had won. Then I nodded. I completely understand," I said. And just like that, Lisa relaxed. Richard let out the slightest breath of relief. They thought I had accepted my fate. They had no idea what was coming. I stood calmly. I didn't rush. I didn't show even a hint of anger. Lisa gave a polite nod, eager to wrap this up. Richard didn't say anything else. He was done with me. I walked to the door. The air outside the conference room felt heavy, the way it does before a storm breaks. I could feel people watching me, whispering, avoiding eye contact. They already knew. By the time I reached my office, I expected to find Jack Vaughn sitting in my chair, grinning like a man who thought he had won the lottery. But no, the office was empty. Perfect. I closed the door, leaned against it for a single moment, and then pulled out my phone. I sent a single text. "It's happening. Friday is my last day." The response came instantly. "Perfect timing. Contracts are ready. Dinner tonight to finalize details. A slow, satisfied smile spread across my face. In 4 days, Summit would think they had won, and by Monday morning, they would realize they had already lost. The moment I stepped out of that boardroom of betrayal, I knew the game had begun. Richard and his pack of corporate vultures thought they had outmaneuvered me, played me like a pawn in their grand scheme. They thought I would walk away quietly, licking my wounds, powerless to fight back. They had no idea they had just made the biggest mistake of their careers, because I had been waiting for this moment. It started with a mistake. A simple misdirected email, sent to me by accident, changed everything. It was late, almost midnight, and I was in my office, running another round of tests on the predictive model when my inbox pinged. I almost didn't open it. I was too tired, too focused on my work. But when I saw my name, something in my gut twisted. I clicked, and there it was, a detailed plan to eliminate me. Every sentence felt like a blade pressing against my skin. Heavy check mark, Phase 1. Minimize her contributions in public meetings. Shift credit to Jack Vaughn. Heavy check mark, Phase 2. Restrict access to executive discussions. Begin justifying her removal to the board. Heavy check mark, Phase 3. Secure the patent under Summit's name before termination. Ensure all intellectual property remains within the company. Heavy check mark, Phase 4. Let her go. Final decision deadline, 6 months from today. My hands clenched around my mouse. I read the email again and again. They weren't just firing me. They were planning to steal my work, rewrite history, and erase my name from the very system I built. I forced myself to breathe. Think. I could have marched into Richard's office right then and confronted him. I could have demanded answers, screamed for justice. But no. That's what they expected me to do. That's what they wanted. Instead, I smiled, because now I had 6 months to turn the tables. Over the next few weeks, I worked in silence, playing the obedient soldier, the loyal executive, while I systematically dismantled their plan from the inside. The AI system they wanted to steal? It wasn't finished. Not the real version. I had spent the last year developing a more powerful, more efficient model. One that Summit didn't own. Heavy check mark, I wrote new code on my personal servers, outside of Summit's reach. Heavy check mark, I used my own encryption, making sure no one at Summit could access it. Heavy check mark, I documented every change, every innovation, with timestamps proving it was my independent work. They thought they were going to inherit a gold mine. They were about to discover they were sitting on a time bomb. They wanted to rewrite history. I made damn sure history would tell the truth. Heavy check mark, I archived every email, every memo, every meeting transcript where I had led critical breakthroughs. Heavy check mark, I collected testimonials from my team, engineers who knew exactly who had built the system. Heavy check mark, I recorded conversations, subtle, innocuous chats where Richard and Jack bragged about their vision for my work. The more they tried to erase me, the more undeniable my presence became. I knew exactly who to call. David Kessler, CEO of Titan Financial Technologies, Summit's biggest competitor, a man with deep pockets, a thirst for innovation, and a grudge against Richard Callaway. We had met years ago at an industry event, and he had always respected my work. One call, that's all it took. We met in a private suite overlooking the city, away from prying corporate eyes. So they finally did it, David said, sipping his bourbon. Friday's my last day, I confirmed, watching his reaction carefully. He leaned forward, eyes gleaming. And the system? I smiled and slid the contract across the table. Heavy check mark, exclusive rights. Heavy check mark, full licensing. Heavy check mark, a 7-figure signing bonus. David laughed, raising his glass. Then let's burn Summit to the ground. For 6 months, I had been coiling like a viper, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, in the final days before my departure, I played my role flawlessly. I attended meetings with a neutral face, even as I listened to Jack Vaughn parrot my ideas as if they were his own. I nodded along as Richard outlined Summit's bright future, knowing that by Monday morning, that future wouldn't exist. Lisa from HR stopped by my office, her expression tight with fake sympathy. "If there's anything we can do to help with the transition, just let us know." I met her gaze, deadpan. "Oh, don't worry, Lisa. I'm more prepared than you think." She had no idea. At 5 p.m., I packed my final box. I walked past Jack Vaughn, already settled into my office, looking smug. He barely looked up. "Big shoes to fill, Jack," I said, stopping at the doorway. "Hope you're ready." He smirked, leaning back in my chair. "This isn't personal, Evelyn. It's just business." I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "You're right," I said. "It's just business." And then I walked out of Summit Dynamics for the last time. By Monday morning, the war would begin, and I would be the one holding the detonator. They thought they had one. By 7 a.m. Monday, they would realize the truth. Heavy checkmark, Titan Financial would announce an exclusive licensing deal for the AI system. Heavy checkmark, Summit stock would crash. Heavy checkmark, their top clients would panic. Heavy checkmark, and Richard Callaway would be fighting for his career. I had been watching and waiting for 6 months. Now, it was time to watch them burn. Because when they tried to bury me, they didn't realize I was the storm. Monday, 10 a.m., the death spiral begins. By mid-morning, Summit Dynamics was officially in freefall. The boardroom, where I had once sat, where I had once been forced to listen to arrogant executives dismiss my contributions, was now the site of panic, raised voices, and sheer desperation. My former lead engineer, Miguel, kept the updates rolling in through texts. "Miguel, fire Richard," just stormed out of the boardroom. Looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Fire legal team is freaking out. Apparently, no one actually reviewed your employment contract before they pulled the trigger on firing you. Fire stock has dropped 18%. Investors are demanding answers." I laughed, shaking my head. This was exactly what they deserved. Summit had thought they could erase me, that I would crawl away in silence, humiliated, broken. Instead, they had fired the wrong woman. And now they were learning that the hard way. By midday, the situation had reached critical mass. Every major financial and tech news outlet had picked up the Titan Financial deal. Heavy checkmark, Summit's most lucrative AI technology, was no longer theirs. Heavy checkmark, clients were calling nonstop, demanding answers. Heavy checkmark, the board was divided, half calling for Richard's resignation, the other half trying to contain the catastrophe. And then, just as I was finishing my morning espresso in my new office at Titan, my assistant walked in. "Evelyn, Summit CFO, is on the line. He's requesting an urgent meeting." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. "Tell him I'm in meetings all day. If he wants to discuss licensing terms, he can speak with Titan's legal department." My assistant nodded, smirking. "Of course. I'll let him know." The message was clear. I no longer worked for Summit. I no longer answered to them. And if they wanted to fix this mess, they would have to beg. By the next morning, the unthinkable happened. Heavy checkmark, Summit stock had officially tanked, down 21% in 24 hours. Heavy checkmark, 2 major clients had already announced plans to switch to Titan. Heavy checkmark, investors were demanding an explanation and a scapegoat. At 9:12 a.m., Miguel's text came through. "Fire Richard is out. Board just forced his resignation." I exhaled slowly. It was done. My assistant nodded, smirking. "Of course. I'll let him know." The message was clear. I had been watching and waiting for 6 months. Now it was time to watch them burn. Because when they tried to bury me, they didn't realize I was the storm. Monday, 10 a.m., the death spiral begins. By mid-morning, Summit Dynamics was officially in freefall. The boardroom, where I had once sat, where I had once been forced to listen to arrogant executives dismiss my contributions, was now the site of panic, raised voices, and sheer desperation. My former lead engineer, Miguel, kept the updates rolling in through texts. Miguel, Fire Richard, just stormed out of the boardroom. Looked like he was about to have a stroke. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Yes, I said. You did. I hung up before he could say another word. He had nothing left to offer me. 1 year to the day after Summit had fired me, I stood on stage at the Financial Tech Summit, the same conference where Richard had once stood on stage, taking credit for my work. Only this time, I was the keynote speaker, and he wasn't even invited. I stepped up to the podium, letting the room settle into silence. Good evening, everyone. I let my eyes sweep over the crowd, my gaze landing on Summit's new executive team, who sat quietly at the back of the room. Tonight, I want to talk about the importance of recognizing and protecting innovation before it walks out the door. Laughter rippled through the audience. They all knew exactly who I was talking about. At the back of the room, Lisa Markson sat pale-faced, avoiding my eyes. Richard, he was nowhere to be seen. I smiled. They thought they could erase me. They thought they could bury me. They didn't realize I was the storm. The walls of Summit Dynamics were crumbling. What had once been a powerhouse in AI-driven finance was now a company in freefall, and I was watching every second of it unfold from my new office at Titan Financial Technologies. Summit had spent years undervaluing me. They had tried to steal my work, erase my legacy, and replace me with a yes-man executive who didn't know the first thing about technology. They thought I would walk away quietly. Instead, I had orchestrated their downfall with surgical precision. And now, I was watching the final, desperate attempts to salvage what was left of their broken empire. Monday, 7 a.m., Summit's worst week begins. By the time the markets opened, heavy checkmark, their stock had dropped another 15% overnight. Heavy checkmark, 2 more major clients announced they were leaving. Heavy checkmark, the tech industry was openly questioning if Summit could even survive. My assistant entered my office, holding up her phone. Lisa from Summit's HR department is trying to schedule a call. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. Decline. Lisa, the same woman who had slid my severance package across the table with fake sympathy, was now scrambling to salvage the wreckage. Too late. 10 a.m. Richard tries to save himself. Richard Callaway, Summit's disgraced CEO, was still grasping at power, trying to convince the board that they could turn things around. Miguel, my former lead engineer, kept me updated. Fire Richard is holding an emergency, all-hands meeting. He looks like he hasn't slept in days. Fire, he's trying to spin it like Titan stole the AI system. No one's buying it. Fire, somebody just asked him why they fired you if you were so replaceable. He couldn't answer. I smirked. They were finally asking the right questions. I forwarded the text thread to Titan's legal team, attaching a simple note. Let them choke on their lies. By the next morning, the inevitable happened. Heavy checkmark, Summit's board of directors had officially lost confidence in Richard. Heavy checkmark, an emergency vote was called. Heavy checkmark, by 10:15 a.m., Richard Callaway was forced to resign. Miguel texted me one word. Fire, he's out. I leaned back, letting the victory settle in. The man who had spent years undermining me had been publicly humiliated, stripped of power, and thrown to the wolves. Karma. Just as Summit was dealing with the fallout from Richard's downfall, Titan sent our final licensing terms. Heavy checkmark, $150 million upfront. Heavy checkmark, 10% royalties on all AI-driven revenue. Heavy checkmark, a public statement acknowledging that I was the rightful creator. The public acknowledgement was what stung the most. For years, Richard and his cronies had tried to erase my name from the company's history. Now, they were being forced to admit the truth to the world. And if they refused, then Summit would collapse completely. By mid-afternoon, Summit had no choice. Their new CEO, some panicked board member who barely lasted a week in the role, personally signed the licensing deal. They paid Titan every penny. They admitted I was the real inventor of the AI system, and they handed over 10% of their future profits, forever. When the final signatures were sent over, David Kessler, Titan CEO, walked into my office with a bottle of champagne. "To your victory," he said, pouring 2 glasses. I raised mine, my smile sharp. To their failure. That evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated. Then I answered. Evelyn. I recognized the voice immediately. Richard. The arrogance was gone. The superiority was gone. All that was left was a broken man grasping at whatever dignity he had left. He exhaled sharply. I just wanted to say. I let the silence stretch, waiting. Finally, he spoke. "I underestimated you." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Yes," I said. "You did." And then I hung up, because he no longer mattered. Exactly 1 year after Summit fired me, I stood on stage at the Financial Tech Summit, staring out at a packed ballroom of investors, executives, and industry leaders, including Summit's new CEO, who sat quietly at the back, knowing they were powerless. I was the keynote speaker. They were just watching. I stepped up to the podium. "Good evening, everyone." The crowd settled into silence. Tonight, I want to talk about the importance of recognizing and protecting innovation before it walks out the door. Laughter rippled through the audience. They all knew exactly who I was talking about. At the back of the room, Lisa Markson sat pale-faced, avoiding my eyes. And Richard, he wasn't even in the industry anymore. I had erased him, and in his place I had built an empire. I smiled. Summit Dynamics was a hollow shell of what it once was. Heavy checkmark, their stock had never recovered. Heavy checkmark, their biggest clients had jumped ship to Titan. Heavy checkmark, their executive team was still scrambling to repair the damage. And Richard Callaway? Gone. Disgraced. Forgotten. Meanwhile, Titan Financial was thriving. Heavy checkmark, our stock had skyrocketed by 38%. Heavy checkmark, we had secured multi-billion-dollar contracts. Heavy checkmark, the AI system, my AI system, was redefining financial forecasting across the industry. I had done more than win. I had rewritten the rules. 1 month after Summit's final surrender, I sat across from David Kessler, Titan CEO. "Evelyn, the board has made a decision." He slid a contract across the table. Chief Strategy Officer. A seat at Titan's executive table. A position of power that Richard had never imagined I could reach. I picked up the contract, flipping through it slowly. "And Richard?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. David smirked. "Last I heard, he's consulting for a third-rate startup in Chicago. No one takes him seriously anymore." I exhaled, letting the satisfaction settle deep in my bones. "Good," I said, signing the contract with a sharp stroke of my pen. By now, Summit was all but forgotten. Heavy checkmark, they had been forced into a desperate merger just to survive. Heavy checkmark, their name had lost all credibility. Heavy checkmark, their former board members were being investigated for stock manipulation. Meanwhile, I was leading Titan's next wave of innovation. And then one day, something unexpected happened. An email, envelope with arrow subject, a formal request for discussion. Summit Dynamics. Their new CEO, begging for a meeting. They wanted MY advice. I burst out laughing. They had spent years dismissing me, and now they wanted me to fix what they had destroyed. I deleted the email without replying. Exactly 2 years after my exit, I walked into a private industry gala in Manhattan. The who's who of financial technology was gathered. The room was filled with billionaire investors, CEOs, and the biggest players in the game. And then I saw him, Richard Callaway. He was standing alone, clutching a whiskey glass, looking like a man who had aged a decade in 2 years. No one was talking to him. No one even acknowledged him. He was a ghost of his former self. And when his eyes met mine, he froze. I raised my glass and smiled. Then, without saying a single word, I turned and walked away, because he no longer existed in my world. By now, Titan Financial had become the dominant force in AI-driven finance. Summit was history. And me? Heavy checkmark, I was an icon. Heavy checkmark, I had built my own empire. Heavy checkmark, I had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that I was unstoppable. And the best part? Every single executive who had tried to erase me now worked in MY industry under MY rules. They thought they could bury me. They didn't realize I was the storm